There are things that cannot be seen, but you know they're there. Jonathan stared at the glass of whiskey on the table, the firelight reflecting off the tears he could no longer shed. 6 months had passed since Maggie, his wife, was gone, and nothing seemed to ease the pain. Halloween, which had always been the couple's favorite holiday, now brought only a cruel emptiness. A year ago, they had been together, dressed in costumes, laughing and decorating the house with fake webs and smiling pumpkins. Now, the house was dark, somber, and he was alone. He took another sip of whiskey, trying to drown the sorrow, but the nagging feeling that something was wrong persisted. The silence in the house was suffocating. Every sound seemed amplified, as if the place was alive, whispering things he didn't want to hear. Jonathan shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. It was just the alcohol. Suddenly, loud knocks echoed at the front door. He frowned. Who would be knocking at his door on a night like this? Trick-or-treaters, maybe? But it was late, and those knocks didn't sound like the playful taps of kids. They were firm, almost urgent. Reluctantly, he rose from the couch, stumbling a little from the drink. When he opened the door, the cold night air rushed in. Standing before him were 3 masked figures, silently staring. Their faces were covered by masks that radiated something deeply unsettling. The first wore a skull mask, dark and detailed, with hollow, black eyes. The second had the grotesque face of a clown, with a grin far too wide and eyes far too small. But it was the third figure that sent a chill down Jonathan's spine. A mask with no face, smooth and featureless, just a void where a face should be. None of them spoke. Jonathan stared at them, his heart pounding. The breathing of the masked figures was barely perceptible, and the silence between them seemed heavier than the air itself. Then, the figure in the skull mask stepped forward and handed him a piece of paper. Confused and irritated, Jonathan took the paper. As he unfolded it, the words hit him like a punch to the chest. Maggie is still in the house. His fist tightened around the paper, his mind racing to make sense of it. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he yelled, the anger rising with his grief. This isn't funny. But when he looked up, the 3 figures had vanished into the darkness. It was as if they had never been there. Jonathan stood in the doorway for a moment, the crumpled paper still clutched in his trembling hand. A chill ran down his spine, and the silence inside the house grew even thicker, almost suffocating. "Maggie is still in the house," started asterisk the words echoed in his mind. He knew it was impossible, but something pulled him back. The memory of Maggie's soft laughter, her way of filling every corner of the house with warmth, felt alive again, stronger than it had on any other night since she left. And then he heard it, a distant laugh, faint but unmistakable. It was her, Maggie. His heart raced, and driven by the courage that whiskey provided, Jonathan decided to follow the sound. He climbed the stairs, each step heavy, echoing in the empty hallway. The laughter led him to the bedroom they once shared. Slowly, he opened the door. There was Maggie, or something that looked like her. From behind, her long brown hair cascaded over her shoulders, and for a moment, Jonathan felt a desperate joy. But then she turned around. Maggie's face was distorted, like a mask that hadn't been fully formed. Her skin seemed to melt and reshape, her eyes too large for her face, her smile crooked, grotesque. Jonathan's stomach twisted, and fear overtook him. This wasn't Maggie. It couldn't be. He tried to run, but the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and twist, as if they were alive. They surrounded Jonathan, wrapping him in a cold embrace. He fell to the floor, screams trapped in his throat, and the last thing he saw before losing consciousness was Maggie's warped face smiling down at him. When Jonathan woke up, the room was dark and empty. He was lying on the floor, and beside him was a mask. It was the Faceless Mask, the same one the mysterious figure had worn. He picked it up with trembling hands, panic rising inside him. He needed to get out of the house, to escape this nightmare. Stumbling, he rushed downstairs, but when he reached the living room, he stopped abruptly. They were there, the 3 masked figures from before, but now, there were more of them. Many more masked figures filled the room, each more disturbing than the last, all silently watching him. He tried to back away, but an invisible force held him in place. The figure in the skull mask stepped forward, slowly approaching Jonathan, who still held the faceless mask in his hand like a useless weapon. "It's time to join us," the skull mask figure said, its voice cold and hollow. Jonathan tried to fight, to resist, but it was no use. His arms moved against his will, and he felt the mask being pressed against his face. A chilling sensation spread across his skin as the mask adjusted perfectly, as if it had been waiting for him all along. His vision began to darken, and he heard, faint but clear, Maggie's voice. "I'm sorry, John. Now you're trapped too." He tried to scream, but no sound came. The world around him dissolved into darkness, and he felt his consciousness being consumed by the shadows. Now, he was just another among the masked figures, a lost, cursed soul, doomed to wander for eternity without rest. When the night ended, the house was empty. Jonathan was never seen again. The following Halloween, 3 masked figures knocked on the door of their next victim. Halloween night had always been special for Claire and Madison. They had a tradition of dressing up, painting their faces with spooky makeup, and seeking adventures in the dark, decorated streets. This night would be no different. The 2 best friends decided to attend a party on the other side of town. Amid laughter and chatter, Claire donned a witch costume, complete with a pointed hat and a black dress. Madison opted for something more daring, a gothic vampire, with a long, flowing cloak that swept the ground and red lenses that glowed under the lights. As they made their way to the party, the night was cold and quiet, broken only by the occasional screams and laughter of children running through the streets. The full moon lit their path, and the carved pumpkins flickered with their twinkling candles on the porches. Everything seemed normal until they realized someone was following them. At first, they thought it was just another costumed kid, perhaps heading to the same party. The figure was a few meters behind them, always just out of direct light. He wore a simple costume, a black suit smeared with fake blood, and a white mask with a wide, sinister, expressionless smile. The mask vaguely resembled a clown, but without the exaggeration. The man walked slowly, unhurried. Claire let out a nervous laugh and turned to Madison. "It's probably just someone trying to scare us." Madison glanced back, rolling her eyes at the sight of the man. "If that's the case, he'll need to try harder. There's nothing scary about being just weird." They continued walking, but the masked man persisted in his pursuit. He didn't run but maintained his distance, always lingering at the edge of their vision. A sense of unease began to grow. The rhythm of their laughter diminished, and silence settled in. "Do you think he's going to the same party?" Claire asked, trying to sound calm, but feeling her heart race. Madison shrugged, but she too now looked uncomfortable. The man was there again, standing at the end of the street, simply watching. "Let's turn here," Madison suggested, taking the lead and quickly rounding a corner. The streets began to grow emptier as they moved away from the decorated houses and entered a dimly lit neighborhood. Shadows stretched across the walls of the old, closed buildings, and the sound of their footsteps echoed in the solitude. They glanced back every few seconds, and the masked figure was closer now. Panic started to overwhelm Claire. "He's not going away." Madison shook her head, trying to appear calm, though tension was evident in her eyes. "Let's take a shortcut." They turned another corner, entering a narrow alley. The streetlights faded behind them, and the darkness was nearly complete, save for the pale light of the moon. They ran for a few meters before stopping to catch their breath. "Did we lose him?" Claire whispered, leaning against a brick wall. Madison looked down the empty alley. "I think so. He can't have followed us here that quickly." Before she could finish her sentence, the sound of slow footsteps echoed through the alley. Claire and Madison turned at the same time, their hearts pounding in their chests. The masked man was there, standing at the entrance of the alley, closer than ever. His painted smile seemed to widen under the dim light, and now he held a long, sharp knife. Claire grabbed Madison's arm, her breath coming quick and desperate. "We need to get out of here. Now!" They ran toward the end of the alley, but a brick wall loomed before them, revealing it to be a dead end. The masked man continued to walk slowly toward them, as if he knew there was no rush. Madison frantically searched for something to defend herself with and picked up an old metal pipe she found on the ground. "Claire, stay behind me," she said, raising the makeshift weapon with trembling hands. The masked man stopped just a few feet away, slowly raising the knife. The silence was oppressive, and Claire could barely breathe. Suddenly, the man ripped off his mask in a swift motion. But to their horror, there was no face beneath the mask, only a void of darkness, an absolute blackness that seemed to absorb all light around it. The friends stood frozen, paralyzed by the terrifying sight. The darkness where a face should have been appeared to expand, swallowing everything in its path. Madison attempted to strike him with a metal pipe, but the instant she made contact, the weapon was drawn into the void, disappearing without a trace. The faceless man took another step forward, and time seemed to freeze. The silence was broken by a deep, distorted voice echoing in their heads. "You should never have looked back." Before either could react, the darkness surged, engulfing them entirely. Claire felt her body enveloped in an absolute chill, as if she were being pulled into an endless abyss. She tried to scream, but no sound emerged, only emptiness. The last thing Claire saw was Madison being consumed by the darkness, and then everything went black. When morning came, the alley was empty. There were no signs of a struggle, nor of Claire or Madison. Only a white mask lay discarded on the ground, its sinister smile still etched upon it.